Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Art Shectman of Elephant Ventures. Art, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Hall.
Well, great, great. Well, you're doing a lot of great things out there in the venture foundry model, and thought you could maybe introduce yourself a little bit to the audience and tell them more about yourself and then how you started Elephant Ventures.
Sure. I'm an engineer by training. I was a MIT guy. I worked in artificial intelligence lab. And originally I was a mechanical engineer, and then I wound up building micro robots for the government for a handful of years and went from there down to Wall Street and did some networking and security stuff and had a different startup and caught the entrepreneurial bug. And then about 14 and a half years ago, founded Elephant, mostly because I wanted to work with great engineers and sort of people who were super solution minded and work on kind of the bleeding edge of technology innovation and what was possible. And so we started off as a consultancy and then really had the vision of ultimately perfecting the art of building innovative solutions. And that evolved into product definitions and helping people refine their concepts and ultimately into the venture foundry model.
Well, it seems you've done a wide range of technologies and projects out there. What would you consider to be your biggest success?
So that's an easy one, and I appreciate you asking. One of the things that came out of the foundry about 4.5 years ago, we founded a company that's a social impact venture that is called Ultra Testing. It's a quality engineering, data engineering, mobile automation, and QA firm that basically is involved in the business of testing. And what makes it a social impact firm is that we recruit and train folks on the autism spectrum. And we had this crazy idea. My co-founder, Rajesh Anandan, was my schoolmate. He had this crazy supposition that sometimes disabilities come with extra abilities. And if you could couple those to a job function, you might have a competitive advantage and therefore a sustainable job creation and change agent for that population. And so we launched into Ultra. We kind of hired a handful of folks and just went off to see like, hey, could this work? And what we discovered is that when we combine neurotypical individuals and folks in the autism spectrum and we give them training around the process of QA and quality engineering, on a good day, we'll find 35% more defects than an average neurotypical only testing firm. And on a great day, our favorite case study, we beat IBM by 56%. So we've sort of thrown out all the rules of modern business advice, of communications, HR, recruiting, staffing, training. And we just said, okay, let's just agree that neurodiversity is a thing and it exists in our world. And even for folks that aren't on the spectrum, there's broad neurodiversity. And wouldn't it be great if a company just accommodated the ways that people thought differently and received information differently and had different social interaction rules? And we just were hyper prescriptive and specific about what all those rules that are typically unwritten, what if we just wrote them down and kind of redesigned the business from the ground up to support a neurodiverse community? And it's been really cool. We like to say, even though we might not be the biggest employer of autism spectrum talent in the world, we like to think we're one of the best.
What is it about autism that gives them an advantage in the Q&A process? What process or thought pattern makes them stand out?
I think we've done some profiling and things like that to figure out, actually, in our recruiting funnel, one of the things we had to overcome was not the idea of an interview process or a recruiting or sourcing process. Our first job description read, totally terrible job, 2 weeks, no likelihood of a future, and please come try it out and see if we can make this work. And we had something like 150 applicants in the first 48 hours. And we realized very quickly on that we had a screening problem, that there was just this massive talent pool that was really itching to work. And from what we found to date, really easy to put to work. In some of the filtering and screening process, we're trying to pick the people in that talent pool that are the most likely to be successful in a testing career. It's very much common sense. Most of the modern recruiting and talent sourcing research these days just talks about looking for the attributes that would make someone successful in your job and then helping those people get the subject matter expertise and training they need to perform the job. But really recruiting for attributes and innate skills and propensities is what we latched onto. And so what we've discovered is that folks on the spectrum can sometimes have really high tolerance for persistence, amazing powers of logical reasoning, and some sensitivity to pattern differentiation or pattern detection that is very helpful in the process of QA. You want someone who doesn't give up. You want someone who can think laterally. You want someone who can see differences in subtle patterns. So it was a great natural fit.
So what do you look for in technologies and talent when you put these projects together? What are the key elements that makes for a successful venture foundry project.
Sure. I'll point to a couple words that I love and language in an ad campaign. The first thing I'll say is I saw this great billboard walking down the street in New York the other day from a company called Fiverr. And it's this gritty looking guy on the poster in black and white. And it just says in black font on the bottom, it just says incubators are for chickens. And I've always hated the term incubator because, it's soft hospital lighting and fluffy, clean, bleached white blankets that are sterile and a nice, cushy pad and warm, happy environment. And that has absolutely nothing to do with like what it takes to start a company. So we prefer the foundry image of like giant 4-ton bins of molten hot steel and smoke and gritty grime everywhere and coveralls and hammers and sweat and hard work. And we latched onto that concept of foundry. And really what we look for, I think fundamentally, is a person or an individual that we would identify as an agent of change, someone who in their core DNA has that engineering problem-solving mindset that they can identify and triangulate on problems and solve them. And then really that they have this empowerment either in their career or their space or their venture or just in their own personality to attempt things that are big and great and fail, and then pivot and learn from the failures. And there's that famous quote of shoot for the moon, and if you miss, you'll wind up amongst the stars. It's the same kind of thing. You need people who have that kind of audacity of self-confidence and an ability to be super resilient and stick through things and learn from their failures and ultimately steer a ship to success.
There are a lot of technologies out there. There's AI, there's fintech, there's data analytics, there's cyber, there's also cryptocurrencies, blockchain. Which of those technologies do you think have the longest legs on them?
Oh, man. So I think if you want to talk about what's going to be on the riding the bow wave of innovation and what's going to be at the forefront and people are going to talk about, I really think modern AI technologies are really about to transform the way that we work and the way that we think and the way that we interact with machines. There's a whole host of new types of applications and features that become possible as AI boils itself down and becomes something that lives on your desktop and something that an average developer can just harness and take advantage of and doesn't even think about. And I just think that there's a whole host of problems that are very readily solvable now that were insurmountable before. And I think I'll harken back to the Ultra example of like how we differentiate in terms of being able to see patterns in a sea of noise and data. And I think modern businesses are really struggling with the same thing. There's all these big data tools, right? There's all this big data being created, but not a lot of folks actually know how to handle it, wrangle it, transform it, clean it, deal with what it is, and understand how to statistically model it and look for patterns or advice or event streams inside of it that tell you how to behave. And I think that kind of low-hanging fruit of all this extra data that's out there and the struggles that the human brain has to handle all the information and all the different correlational sources or statistical analysis or the sort of learned behaviors from watching different transactions occur, I think it's ripe for a whole bunch of different machine learning, both supervised and unsupervised tasking and tasks. And I think the average developer engineer desktop now includes tools that leverage AI functions in the desktop or the IDE. And I just think that's a really exciting merger of kind of two different trends, one kind of coming to fruition with big data sort of everywhere, and AI really becoming a useful tool in the toolbox, not some voodoo incantation that only 5 guys in the world know how to do. And I should say three women and 5 guys.
I actually worked on AI back in the 80s, and it was going to save the world then too, but it didn't quite get there because it turned out that, to be devil's advocate, it required a lot of clean, well-structured data and only worked on very specific problems, those that had a very definitive tree structure that you could program. What's changed from then to now that makes AI going to be a much bigger thing than it was last round?
I think you saw ghosts of what was going to happen now back in the late 80s, early 90s when we were programming robots in the AI lab. Subsumption architecture was a big deal. And it was there was some basic genetic algorithm kind of things. And the tools and the processing power weren't quite there, right? You were always trying to do this in either an embedded or a machine vision thing. And I think just raw compute power has evolved. So the kind of layers of learning that are very similar to the old genetic algorithm days and the kind of self-tuning that you can do that in subsumption you used to have to create these different priorities and different weights for different behaviors and different inputs and things. And I think what's happened is you've kind of been able to couple the two, where you've got these systems where in supervised or unsupervised learning, depends on which case you're really talking about, but that they're able to emit training signal on a much broader and much bigger platform than before. So you get these very complicated models that evolve in the messy bits in the middle, and you have the compute power to run them and then also to tune them and do sort of massive parameter tuning on those models before you actually launch and deploy them. And we didn't have those tools back in the day. It was much, much harder and much, much more time consuming. So
yeah, I look forward to it. It seems like AI has a lot of potential and is going forward, and other technologies like blockchain seem to be coming up and going strong as well. What's your take on blockchain?
It's going to save the universe. It's interesting. So we're called on quite a bit these days to help people find their way in the blockchain space. So much so that we have an internal cultural jazz hands of blockchain when people use the term blockchain and mean it to solve any particular problem that a normal encrypted database could have solved before. We sort of roll our eyes and look at each other and give each other the jazz hands of blockchain and say like, oh yeah, blockchain, it's great. It's fantastic. But there are certain problems that it solves really, really well, like the transitive value and the non-repudiation of transactional chains like provenance problems. We've been poking around in it for about a year and getting real serious about it. And in the December timeframe, we actually accidentally started a hedge fund. And I really say accidentally because we're big data guys, and we're the gals in the engineering team who write our algorithms and build some of our ETL pipelines are amazing. And we just have all these skills to rapidly prototype large data set pipelines and algorithmic work on top of them. And we just started studying the crypto markets and figured out that there was a bunch of interesting trading strategies you could deploy that sometimes make money and sometimes don't, but more often than not, they're making money. So we said, this is sort of a hedge fund. Why don't we just see if we can automate a bunch of this stuff and start trading? So about 9.5 weeks ago, I guess, we built a prototype and are just about to unleash it on the world. But it seems to be working in both manual testing and in our simulator to be making money. But it's a fascinating problem, and it's ripe for machine learning and sort of the merger of that sort of analytical discovery of features and feature correlations that is that intersection between tools for big data and the data that's available and the way that systems can do supervised learning these days and even unsupervised learning. It's been a fascinating evolution. And we've had a handful of folks come to us and say, well, you're like, okay, you guys seem to understand what blockchain is good for. Can you help us understand as the coming disruption happens, what is it going to do to our business? What can we do in our business with blockchain? And that's been really hard. And we have a couple of different ways that we engage with folks outside of the Foundry, but sometimes folks will just pay us to help them do a concept refinement sprint. And a bunch of them we've done lately have been about how do you embed blockchain into our organization? Some big, fairly established brands and giant companies have said, hey, we've got this innovation lab, we've got these needs. What do we do with blockchain? And it's interesting because I'd say 80% of the internal ideas that people have are really what I would say blockchain stuck to the side sort of ideas, where if you had a database or you had some data encryption in the past, you could do the exact same thing. And folks kind of miss out on some of the core attributes of blockchain-based technologies that allow it to do new or differentiated things that weren't really possible before. So I think the fervor we see around blockchain will tail off, and folks will find that a lot of the stuff that was supposed to have all this awesome promise and saw a lot of investment dollars go into it because it had the word blockchain associated with it are going to wind up being a waste of time, and really just applications that assembled a blockchain-based prototype that really could have just used a database. But then there's some really interesting things where provenance is really important. That chain of custody of a bit of information or a bit of physical property tied to a bit of information are going to be really, really, really important. And I think when you look at the reason that banks and finance and all kinds of things have evolved from kind of first principles of economics and interlocation commerce and things like that, some of the cryptocurrency stuff is really going to be disruptive to the modern banking infrastructure, right? The point of the banks was really to provide stability and to provide surety. When transaction processing subjects itself to an incorruptible and publicly shared ledger that can be inspected, and everyone agrees Just like you agree with paper money, it's got an ability to transact value by passing it along. The cryptocurrency implementations of blockchain are essentially the same thing. And a lot of the functions of surety and sort of non-repudiation of transactions and that transfer of value that banks perform these days, really just that function is done by an algorithm. You're going to, I think, see a massive fintech transformation based on it. And then I think some of the other things about where things came from and how they got to you, I think the generations, especially the younger generations these days, they actually really care about stuff like that. And they feel that they have an active role to play in shaping the destiny of the world by their consumption habits and their sourcing habits. And, we all have something to be learned from that idea. And as you get into a blockchain powered supply chain all over the place, that question of where did my stuff come from or where's it going becomes answerable at the minutest levels with some degree of non-counterfeit information. So I think you're going to see a lot of interesting kind of supply chain things happen. I have a dream that one day somebody will build a firearm registry based on blockchain and sort of disrupt the entire world of how we track and use firearms these days. But it's a whole other story.
Well, you see a lot of interest in the fintech space, but when you get down to a blockchain, it struggles with scalability and usability in some cases. The audit trails and the decentralization is great, but fintech needs many more vectors to be usable on a broad basis, and in niche areas you could probably make it work. Supply chain seems like that's going to be the biggest win coming out the gate. Already seen applications from Coca-Cola, Nestle, and others where they want to know all the elements that went into their product, where did it come from, and who was impacted, and having that all in one system is something that is going to appears to be a slam dunk for them. But where else do you think you might see that the advantages of blockchain really having an early win out there where it really doesn't need that much scalability? Because I think it's going to be a while before they get to that, or maybe you have other thoughts on that too.
I would disagree that the scalability is going to be an issue. I think in the kind of early implementations of blockchain tech, that particularly if you're talking about something like the underpinnings of Bitcoin and how it works and the propagation delays for transactions and things like that, they weren't really designed to be super highly performant. And there are performant blockchains out there that are prescriptive and have pre-built non-miner based tokens that get passed around, and that they've got pre-filled inventories and things like that. And then they've got streamlined on and off chain calculations. There's a pile of work that's gone into making them super performant. And I think you'll see an evolution in blockchain algorithms and architectural structures and ways to apply it that will make it super performant. Like, I think the computer science community will eventually solve those problems, and eventually is 2 or 3 years away, not 50 years away. I don't think that kind of a problem will prevent it from eating the lunch of a large part of financial services in the fintech industry. But that said, I think there's a whole aspect of human information, personal information, particularly around healthcare as well, where you want some type of smart contracty entitlement-based brokerage of information that you want to share. A no-brainer should be that health records become centralized for people, and that you kind of own the private key infrastructure that allows the information in your health record to be accessed, and you have a smart contracted audit trail of who accessed it and when and how. And I think there's going to be some really interesting kind of fluidity that's created in the healthcare industry when you're able to have that kind of instant and unified access to medical records. That's sort of a solution, in my opinion, that's long overdue.
Well, there's plenty of opportunity out there for everyone, and it sounds like you're in the middle of all of it. In the final minute we have here today, what else should we cover that we haven't so far?
I don't know. I would just say the venture development kind of foundry space is a super interesting one. We've spent the last 14 years kind of perfecting our methodology that helps us take folks from inspiration and ideation into traction and all the gritty hard work in between. I would love to hear from folks that have interesting ideas that they're trying to move along.
So what's the best way for people to get back in touch with you? LinkedIn, website, or what works best?
Yeah, either way, they can go to elephantventures.com or elephant.ventures if they're feeling fancy. I'm also up on LinkedIn.
All right. We'll put that in the show notes, and appreciate you taking time to share with us the information about what you do at what Elephant Ventures does, and hope to have you back for another discussion here in the near future.
Sure. Thanks, all. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Take care.